Okay, let's get started. I've already gotten some comments about my jacket. It is my Ehud Barak costume, so I just wanted to throw that out there if there are any any concerns. Thank you everybody for joining this call on Israeli elections. There's a lot to talk about. Tomorrow is a big day. Expected announcement of the Attorney General on the cases of Benjamin Netanyahu. So I'm going to turn the call over to our policy director, Michael Koplow. Before I do that, if anybody has a question, there's a Q&A. If you're on your computer, there's a Q&A kind of button on the bottom. You'll just ask your question there, and we'll try to get to all the questions. If you want to ask a question by audio, you can just raise your hand, and we'll get to you towards the end of the call. With that, I'll pass the call over to Michael.
Great. Thank you, Eli. And we're delighted to have with us the always excellent Tal Shalev, who is the apolitical correspondent for Walla News. So let's jump right into things, since there's lots to discuss. So before we get to what is likely to be tomorrow's big story, let's quickly discuss last week's big story, which was the merger between Bayit Yehudi and Otzma Yehudit that Prime Minister Netanyahu essentially forced together. So can you quickly talk about, I think everybody on this call, I'm sure, is familiar with what happened, given the uproar it caused, particularly here in the US. But can you talk a little bit about what the reaction to that merger has been in Israel, and whether the Prime Minister has suffered much blowback from it?
So first, I would say that if you ask any average Israeli what was the big political story of last week, that would not be the number one story. That would be the number two story. Because the number one story is the emergence of this new general party. So first of all, I think that the Israeli political system is still getting used to that idea. We have this new big political creature, which is very much, I would say, attracting most of the political attention, because we have new players, and we're trying to understand what exactly they are saying. And then, of course, the other story, the one about Otzma Yehudit, that is actually just a fraction of the bigger story. The reason that Netanyahu was so hysterical about getting this done, and the reason that he's not getting a lot of criticism from it inside the Likud, is the fact that there was a huge panic in the Likud that they're going to lose. And there's a huge concern in the right about how large the bloc will be. There's a very big concern about the right-wing dominance in this election. So I think that what we're seeing is, first of all, we're seeing a very vivid discussion. After the very, I would say, strong Jewish American protest, I think that that bolstered, in a way, some of the left-wing factions in Israel to come out in a much stronger voice against against Otzma Yehudit. And we've seen in the past week, I think, various cases and instances of candidates from the Labor and Meretz party just walking out of like election debates in which they're participating side by side with Otzma Yehudit representatives. So we're seeing, on the one hand, a very strong protest from center-left parties talking against them. On the other hand, we're seeing, I would say, the Likud quite quiet, not even opening their mouths about it, generally not criticizing Netanyahu too much. Naftali Bennett, of course, trying not to criticize too much, because everyone is on the battle for the same votes in the right-wing side. One should point out that Dafka Avigdor Lieberman was the strongest voice on the right side of the map, who came out against Otzma Yehudit this week. He sees them as a very radical religious party, and he's posing himself against them. And Netanyahu hasn't addressed the issue at all. Netanyahu is busy with 200,000 other things, and it's been a busy couple of days. So Netanyahu himself has not addressed the crisis or the protest of the American Jewish community at all. He just finished a briefing with journalists in Moscow. He didn't address that question at all. The cycle here, I would say, is so crazy that we're past like 5 big stories since that. So I assume it'll be a question that will hover over all of the elections. It will be one of the topics, but basically from tomorrow, everything's just going to be about yes, Bibi, no Bibi, yes, Bibi, no Bibi. So it'll probably fade away somewhere. I don't think that they are going to ever be part of a coalition. I don't think that Netanyahu would like them to be part of a coalition. I think that Netanyahu is playing a double game with the right-wing voters. He's trying to save the votes in order to save his dominance. So he's agreed with them on all kinds of very generous agreements and ministers and cabinet membership and being part of the judicial committee, which is a big thing. But I don't see them eventually joining Netanyahu's government. I think it's much more likely to see Netanyahu looking for the moderates to join him and to create a national unity government with blue and white and leave the more right-wing elements outside.
Just to clarify, you think that he's not going to form a government with Bayit Yehudi either, not just leaving Otzma aside?
Well, but I think that well, this is also the next big question after Mendelblit will be the ultimate deal and Trump's peace deal, and I think that I don't see a way that Bayit Yehudi and Otzma Yehudit can be part of a coalition in which Netanyahu has to deal with any deal that comes from the U.S. and from the White House.
Okay, so let's move to Kachol Lavan now, which you mentioned already. But obviously, you have this big block, and you have four men at the top: Benny Gantz, Yair Lapid, Gabi Ashkenazi, and Bogi Ya'alon. So to begin with, do you see these 4 actually all meshing and being able to get along and form a coherent platform and actually get the most votes? I mean, there's a lot of there seems to be a fair amount of policy differences on some issues between them. It's obviously a lot of egos. So how do you see that partnership actually working?
I think it's too early to tell. They've since the announcement last week, they've basically been under the radar, trying to figure out those questions, trying to figure out exactly how it's going to work. I think that there are many challenges that they will have to overcome, but at large, when you see the public reaction to them, and you take into consideration how much people want to replace Netanyahu, and it is quite, I would say, an impressive, it's an impressive gang at the top. I mean, having 3 chief of staffs for former IDF chief of staffs for the average Israeli, that's like, wow, that's like, it's like 3 heroes together. It's a very strong image. And Lapid is nice there also in the picture, but of course it's about the generals. And I think that if they play their cards right, there's a good potential that they will, that they could succeed, and that we see the problems only after the elections emerging, the ego problems. There are a lot of people who want to hurt them, and we have to remember these are 2-3 generals, not 2-3 politicians. So it'll be very interesting to see how they navigate through this. Just as we speak, I mean, today there was like this big story going on with a Facebook post that was posted by a lady, an Israeli woman who lives in New York, who basically claims that Benny Gantz sexually attacked her when she was 14 and he was 17. We've been basically spending all day trying to verify if this story is true and to see if there's anything to it. But this is, we don't know yet if it's news or fake news or what it is, but there's a lot of dirt that's going to be thrown at this party in the next 45 days, and they do not necessarily have enough time to repair. So maybe with this specific post, Benny Gantz, or he's doing okay, but I think it's going to be very challenging for them. Also, and I'm saying this as, you know, at the end of the day, Netanyahu is using the strategy of trying to coin them as leftists and to create this as to kind of merge this as a battle between left and right, even though Benny Gantz's list is not necessarily leftist at all. There are very strong right-wing factors there as well. But I think that eventually that could work. Netanyahu is a very, very brilliant campaigner, and the Israeli public at large is very right-wing and is very in love with Netanyahu. So it's going to be a very interesting game for them to play. I don't think that the policy differences between them actually matter that much. I mean, we journalists are going to look into all of the policy differences. But at the end of the day, it's not about policy. And we see this. I mean, people do not vote for Bibi because of his policies. He has never stated what his policies are. People vote for Bibi because he has the right image and he gives them a sense of security. So if this new gang succeeds to create that image, then they might do it.
Do you see any path to Gantz and Lapid forming a coalition that does not involve a unity government with Likud?
Not likely.
Mm-hmm.
Not likely.
And so if their only path is a unity government with Likud, what is that going to do to the Gantz-Lapid agreement about a prime ministerial rotation?
So that kind of depends. Depends on the numbers. I mean, it depends. First of all, who's first, the Likud or Coughlin, blue-white. So if the Likud are first, then the rotation goes down the drain anyway, because Lapid and Gantz will not divide their agreements 2 years into 1 year each. And if Otzmani and if Coughlin, if blue-white wins in the wide majority, then that really depends also on the question, does Netanyahu go home? If there's a big question, if Netanyahu loses this election, will he say, come on, there's a well-known catchphrase, Boy Sarah le'osim, come on Sarah, we're going home, which he said in 99. So we don't know if he loses the election. I mean, it's hard to imagine him losing the election, but let's say he does lose the election. I don't know, in 99, he went home. So maybe he'll go home again in 2019 if he loses, but he could also decide to stay and try and negotiate some kind of rotation agreement with them. I think it's too early to tell, but I think it's quite clear that they will be part of the government. If Netanyahu goes home, then the question is also who is the leader of the Likud? What kind of who wins the primary? Who is the leader of the Likud who you negotiate with? So I think that it really depends on the numbers, the final numbers.
You think that Gantz and Lapid would be willing to sit in a unity government with Netanyahu himself, despite the fact that their campaign is basically, we're not Netanyahu and he needs to be replaced?
Weirder things have happened. I mean, it's a campaign promise. At the end of the day, this is a party which gathers so many, big shots that they won't be in the opposition. What exactly will Gabi Ashkenazi be doing in the opposition? Chairing the health committee. Avi Nissenkorn, who's the chair of the labor union. I mean, he will not, be an MK on the economy committee in the Knesset. I think that this is a party, in any case, that needs to have some kind of ministerial experience. Even if they want to win the election the next time, they need to have some time in office. So I find it very hard to believe that they don't eventually join Netanyahu's government if Netanyahu does win the election, even though they say exactly the opposite.
Right. Let's talk about Trump for a moment, since Jared Kushner was out yesterday with an interview talking about his peace plan. So, to what extent do you think, it seems pretty obvious that no peace plan is going to be released before April 9th, but to what extent do you think that the Trump plan is going to have an effect on the elections and which parties people vote for. Obviously, Bennett has already been trying to make it an issue and accused Netanyahu of trying to form a Palestinian state with Trump, and Netanyahu came back and said no, he fought against Obama, he's working with Trump. Do you think that this is actually going to be a factor, or is it just people talking?
Again, I don't know, but I think first of all, listen, we're going to have a few days in which everything is going to be like washed with this indictment thing. It's not going to be only one day. It's going to be a few days, even weeks, in which there's going to be constant flow of information about indictments or details from the investigations, testimonies from the investigations, which will be leaked or released to the press. And that will be topping the agenda. So it'll be very difficult for the peace plan, given that it's not going to be presented up until the elections. It'll be difficult to keep it high on the agenda. But it really depends on the White House. If Donald Trump next week or in 2 weeks' time gives an interview somewhere and is asked about his plan, and he just happens to mention that something that resembles a two-state solution, just as Jared Kushner did this week, or something that would say something about Jerusalem or about giving, compensating the Palestinians on Jerusalem, that could create, periodical discussion about the peace plan, and it could be high on the agenda. How much will it define the elections? I don't think it will, because we will not be necessarily seeing a very wide or interesting variety or range of ideas on it. I mean, it's mainly interesting to see how Netanyahu will react to it. We know how right-wing parties are going to react to it. They've already stated it. We know how left-wing parties are going to react to it. We don't know how Netanyahu will react to it, and we don't exactly or necessarily know how Gantz's party will react to it, because we have big rejectionist Bogi Ya'alon in that party. So Benny Gantz and Gabi Ashkenazi and Yair Lapid might love the American plan, but Ya'alon will not necessarily love it, and nor will other members, right-wing members of his party. And I also want to say that it's actually good that for Bennett, it's the perfect classic campaign topic, because Bennett has to fight this trend of voters who will be wanting to vote for Bibi to strengthen him, and he has to present some kind of some good convincing reason to vote for him, and this could be a convincing reason to vote for him because he is more right-wing than Netanyahu on these matters. So Bennett is going to constantly keep it on the agenda. So like for today, he called on President Trump to publish the plan even before the elections. And I don't know if Donald Trump eventually just even if he just has like a slip of tongue and says something about the plan, this could definitely be a major topic, and especially embarrass Netanyahu, because Netanyahu will be kind of torn between his base and between his need or desire to be polite and to have a good relationship with the Oval Office.
All right, let's move to what's going to be tomorrow's big news in all likelihood, which is the indictments themselves. So, from what's been reported, it sounds like cases 1,000 and 2,000 are going to be breach of trust. Case 4,000 is going to be bribery, which in some ways is a victory for Netanyahu if he avoids bribery on the first two. I've consistently been arguing that whenever indictments come, they're not going to affect Netanyahu's poll numbers because it's already priced in. People have been expecting this for a while, but I'm curious to hear your views on how you think the indictments are likely to affect his numbers and numbers for the Likud overall.
So, I want to say that I don't know. That's the big question. I mean, that's why this is such a dramatic event, because we do not know how it's going to affect the numbers. This is not an event that's ever happened. We've never had a campaigning prime minister indicted for bribery. And I wanted this. I don't think that Netanyahu it doesn't really matter if Netanyahu has 3 indictments on bribery or 1. It really matters if he has the word bribery over him from now on. So just the fact that he has 4,000 with bribery is a big deal. I think that so we don't know how the voters will act. There's a very strong thesis that that kind of suggests what you suggested, that if we look at what happened in the past 3 years, Netanyahu only got stronger. Every time he got into more legal and criminal trouble, he would spike in the polls. And we're seeing even Netanyahu today, he's stronger. He's very strong, despite and maybe even because of the criminal investigations. So there's a good reason to say that if what has happened in the past will happen from now on. There's also a good reason to question that. I think election campaigns are known to be, like a mess. And we don't know exactly, like things happen very quickly. And it is a very dramatic legal decision. I mean, Netanyahu will try to emphasize the part that it's conditioned by a hearing. So you'll say Netanyahu say this is just another stage. After the hearing is an important stage, but legally it is this is the preliminary decision, but it is the decision that actually matters. And it's not only about the decision tomorrow, it's about what happens afterwards. Because we have, I think, and don't catch me on this number, but there are probably at least 5 or 6 other people who are going to be indicted with Netanyahu tomorrow. In the 2000 affair, the publisher of Yediot Achronot, Noni Moses, is going to be indicted for bribery. So is Walla's former owner, Shaul Alovich, is going to be indicted for bribery. And many other people. So I guess it's 6 or 7. I don't know the exact number, but all of these people have lawyers. All of these people have lawyers who will be getting the materials tomorrow, meaning that we will be seeing reports coming out and a lot of leaks of testimonies on a daily basis for the next few days, which could reveal embarrassing stuff about Netanyahu. Netanyahu does not want his tape. He taped his discussions with Noni Moses. So if that tape comes out, that could be an embarrassing event for Netanyahu. If some testimony comes out about how Sarah Netanyahu was hysterical about her champagne, then that could be embarrassing for Netanyahu. So it's not necessarily only the decision, but how much information will come out afterwards. And I think that's where the impact and the effect on the voters could occur. And it is the first time as far as I remember, that there's a real alternative that's not a leftist, okay? The 3 generals and Lapid, there could definitely be right-wing voters who say, well, yes, it's been 10 years, we've had enough, and we have an alternative this time, and we're not afraid to go to sleep. But still, we already announced, as political analysts, we already announced 2 times that the elections have started all over again. After Benny Gantz's first speech, and after last week when they announced this new block. So tomorrow we're all going to say it again. The election started all over again. So it's really, I'm saying this like with all modesty, it's very difficult to predict anything. And I kind of feel like everything I say now could basically go down the drain tomorrow.
Do you think there's any chance, based on that analysis you just gave, about things that will continue to come out and, particularly embarrassing recordings or conversations or details? Do you think there's any chance at all that Netanyahu does not stand for re-election at the head of Likud on April 9th?
There are a lot of people who have that fantasy. There are people who have been promoting this theory that Netanyahu, after tomorrow, his lawyers will come and say, listen, you should cut a deal, just cut a deal and finish your career. I think that's a fantasy. I think that what we're seeing is a very, very, very decisive and very tough Netanyahu who is going to fight by all means, both for his seat and for his alleged innocence. And I think that the likelihood of him not standing at the head of the Likud, I wouldn't bet on it at all. I mean, things could happen. As I said, it's never happened, this situation. So I don't know if Netanyahu will have a press conference tomorrow, 8 o'clock, and will he be sweaty and how he will be looking. And he's going to be going through very difficult days. He's already going through very difficult days. But I don't see him giving up. It's just not where he is. That's not the state of mind as I sense it these days.
Okay, so we have a bunch of questions piling up here. So let me read some of the ones that have come in, and then we'll turn to people who can ask questions themselves. From our Jewish insider friend Jacob Kornblue, he wants to know: is there a possibility that Bennett or Coughlin announce tomorrow they will not sit with Netanyahu after the election if the charges against him are severe? And if so, would this help Bibi rally his base or narrow Bibi's options to form a government?
Hi, Jacob. I don't think that Bennett or Coughlin would do that. Both Bennett and Coughlin basically are in a very, very difficult situation. They're both, Coughlin is in a worse situation, somewhere very close to the electoral threshold. And Bennett started out okay with 8 seats, but now he's with 5 or 6 seats in most of the polls. And for them to make any clear statement about Bibi tomorrow would be a mistake, because it would just push away right-wing voters who generally, essentially, still want Bibi. Moreover, Coughlin is probably the most far-reaching right-wing politician on this matter, because Coughlin is the only one who has actually said that after an indictment, after the hearing and after the final indictment, Netanyahu will not be able to continue to be a prime minister. But there's no real reason for him to go further with that position at this point, given where he is in the polls. I don't think that anyone even expects them to do that. I mean, we'll be asking about it, and they'll be saying that there's still a hearing, and I guess that legally they'll be right, and they'll say that the decision needs to be made when he reaches the final hearing, when he actually is going to start a trial in court, because that's when it's not, it's unthinkable to think about a sitting prime minister going to court 3 times a week.
Okay. From Harry Reese, you touched upon this briefly in the beginning, but how did the Jewish American protest factor into the Israeli public discussion?
I think it factored, actually, I think it was quite surprising. It actually caught the headlines for the whole weekend. I think that the fact that AIPAC, of course, the AIPAC announcement was the most dramatic one. I think that kind of woke up, most Israelis do not necessarily understand the organizational map of the United States, but they know that AIPAC is generally pro-Netanyahu. So if they denounce Netanyahu, something is essentially wrong. So I think that it caught relatively quite respected portion of the cycle. And it, of course, it's a liberal protest. So it's a liberal protest which is adopted naturally by most journalists who basically agree that this is a dangerous and slippery slope. And it was also, as I said, I think it actually bolstered Labor and Meretz politicians to be more vocal about it, and to come out in a very clear voice. And I would say there's also a huge gap, of course. I think that Israelis in general probably were less shattered by it than American Jews. The average Israeli was not shattered by the notion of Itamar Ben-Gvir being part of the Jewish home. But I think that the protest was heard, and again, it comes on a fertile ground. So everyone knows that there's a big crisis with American Jewry, and it kind of actually brought it into the election. It faded away, I guess, by Sunday afternoon, but just because the cycle here really is crazy. And of course, it'll come back if and when Netanyahu does go to AIPAC, it'll be back in the headlines again. And I guess it's going to be a very tricky, sensitive, and interesting visit to Netanyahu to DC at the end of the month.
Yeah, to say the least. Are you going to AIPAC, by the way?
I lost you.
Are you going to AIPAC this year?
I will be going to AIPAC this year.
Okay. Another question from Robert Kantowitz. Is it likely that Netanyahu, if he stays as prime minister, will form a government without Otzma? Or if it is likely that if he stays as prime minister, he will form a government without Otzma, is it also likely that he will make sure that some of his proxies will convince centrist voters that it is safe to vote for Likud? In other words, if it's likely that he's going to form a national unity government, is that going to be enough to convince centrist voters that they should be voting for Likud?
He doesn't have to convince centrist voters. He has to convince right-wing voters. So it's not, he on the record is saying that he wants to form a right-wing government. He will never say that he wants to form, God forbid, with those leftists from the blue-white party, right? So this is where, Bennett will be trying to kind of say, all the elections, listen, this is what's going to happen. And Netanyahu is going to say, Bennett is just childish. Of course, I'm going to be forming a right-wing coalition. So, but yes, Netanyahu, in a way, will be, I predict, will be cheating his right-wing voters, because I think that essentially, look, generally, historically, Netanyahu did not have right-wing. He always had like a fig leaf in his government. He had Ehud Barak, and then he had Tzipi Livni, and this was the only government in which he had a right-wing government with no like moderate center-left party part of it. It was very convenient for him, but it also pushed him into places which he did not want to be. And Netanyahu, I think, he would also really like to keep Bennett outside of the government. So I think that the blue-white option is not only the right option from his point of view, but it's also the option that most of the voters in Israel would, if you ask the average Israeli, he would probably say, yes, we prefer a national unity government on anything else. It's popular. It's a popular notion.
A question from Jason Berkovich. With all the movement going on with lists, why wouldn't Gesher and Hatznua and Orly Levy, which is Gesher, why wouldn't they team up? Kachol Lavan was clearly missing women, so wouldn't Livni and Orly Levy galvanize women to vote?
Livni and Orly Levy, I'm not sure they could even live together in the same party. Mm-hmm. That they have nothing in common generally. Livni is like pure diplomatic security, and Orly Levy is pure socioeconomic, and they're both very, very strong women. I don't think they could sit together. I'm not even sure they even considered that option, even though, as you say, it's actually an interesting idea. Tzipi Livni had I would say, a tragic end in this election campaign, because basically nobody wanted her as a partner. So I guess that Orly Levy didn't want her either. I do think that Orly Levy will start to campaign very strong on the feminist issue. She has the number 3 woman in her the number 3 on her list. Ifat Biton is a very, very impressive, charismatic woman lawyer, and I think that together they're going in the blue-white party and in the general party, which really did forget women, then they're going to be campaigning on that very strong. I also think that Naftali Bennett and Ayelet Shaked are going to be campaigning on that issue. Ayelet Shaked, in Naftali Bennett, there's also Ayelet Shaked and also another new strong woman, newcomer called Alona Barkat, who is the owner of Hapoel Be'er Sheva, one of Israel's most popular soccer teams. She's going to be a star as well. I think that Blue-White Party are going, I think it was a mistake the way they positioned women on their list. And I think that, yes, some women will strategically vote differently because of that.
All right, we have a question from David Welsh. What are the chances that Labor fall below the threshold? And I guess I'll add to that one, because I don't think that, I'll hear what your answer is. That seems unlikely to me, but I'm curious if there are parties that you think are not going to make it, such as Yisrael Beitenu or Shas or Kulanu.
I don't think the Labor Party is going to go under the threshold. We were in that danger zone before the primaries, but after the primaries, they kind of presented a very impressive team. Avi Gabay is probably the Labor's, worst asset. And everyone else on the list is much more popular than him, but that has bolstered him in the polls. And I think that also I sense many people who now understand how the Blue-White Party is and how it's a real center party, if not center-right. And I think that there are voters coming back to the Labor Party and that we might even see them getting even stronger, maybe 10, 12 seats eventually. Regarding other parties, yes, there's a real concern for Meretz. There's a real concern for Kulanu. There's a real concern for Israel Beitenu. There's a real concern for Shas. There is even concern to one of the Arab parties. There's what we see is that we're seeing like the Likud, and we'll probably see the Likud and blue and white getting stronger, but then necessarily will mean that many of these small players will just disappear. That could be one of the trends, but maybe, again, since this attorney general thing is like such a big, it's going to create such a big abyss in everything we're talking about, maybe the distribution of the votes after the indictment will be different than it is right now, and maybe things will stabilize for some of these parties. But as we speak, I think there are at least 4 or 5 parties who will be in the danger of not passing the threshold.
All right, and then one last question from me, which is, given that Netanyahu is going to have to keep the support of his coalition if he wants to remain prime minister following indictments, why doesn't it make more sense, or I should say, why isn't it more likely that he tries to form an extremely right-wing government of the parties that are his natural base, who are most likely to keep on supporting him, as opposed to a national unity government with Kachol Lavan, who are not necessarily in his natural base and do not necessarily have the same incentive to support him through indictments?
Because of Donald Trump. Because if Donald Trump presents any kind of a plan, Netanyahu will want to have some kind of space in which he will be able not to have to say a complete no to Donald Trump, in which he will be able to say yes, maybe, in which he will be able to create some kind of political discussion about this plan, which might eventually fail anyway because of the Palestinians or because of other players. But I think that Netanyahu will want to have the strongest, to have the widest coalition as possible for him to be able to kind of navigate within this situation. It is clear that any peace plan that talks about Jerusalem neighborhoods, Netanyahu will have problems with it. Bennett cannot live with this kind of a plan, and even inside the Likud. Also, which is a whole totally different issue, Netanyahu will also have internal rebellion in his own party because of the Trump plan. But I think that I think that as far as we know, things are coordinated in some way or another between the White House and Netanyahu's office. And I think that this fits. And there's a theory, and this is a theory which, could have, well, we can wait and see if it actually happens, that he will want to do this in order to get the left wing embrace and for them to give him a break with the investigations, to do like a Sharon move. The idea is, and you see people say that, by the way, this is part of public discourse in Israel. You see prominent journalists who say, if Netanyahu makes a historic peace deal, he can stay prime minister. I don't care if he's corrupt. So many prominent, I would say, many people might be able to accept that deal in the center left, to say, okay, we can swallow Bibi a bit more if he brings some kind of progress. Of course, then we get into the question, who believes Netanyahu on what by this point? But that would probably be for our next conference call.
So I take it from your answer that you think that we will see the Trump peace plan at some point after April 9th.
I hope, just because it'll be interesting, and we've been talking, we've had all of this buildup and expectation, so at least we see something out of it. If not, we'll get a lot of Israeli journalists disappointed for wasting our time.
Right. Okay, so I think with that, we will wrap up. Thank you so much, Tal, for joining us. Thank you, everybody who called in. And I would urge everybody, if you aren't already, to follow Tal on Twitter and her writing, but also please check out our 120 project on israelpolicyforum.org/elections, where you can read exclusive content from Tal. You can read stuff from me, from Evan Gottesman, some of my other colleagues. We have polls, we have podcasts, we have writing, all sorts of good stuff, weekly news quizzes. So please check it out. And thanks to all of you, and have a great day.